Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, I'm Fadira Tiara Ramadhani, student number 10 from 3BB class. Today I will review the journal article Defining Arts and Its Future, author Zachary Isrow, from Journal of Arts and Humanities, publication year 2017, volume number 6, issues number 6, and page 84 until 94. And this is author biography. Zachary Isrow is Global Center for Advanced Studies or Alma Mater Europe. Zachary Alan Isrow is a doctoral candidate with the Global Center for Advanced Studies in partnership with Alma Mater Europe. Introduction. Here you call introduction defining arts is a difficult task. It's one which many theorists, artists, and critics have tackled trying to decide upon the best approach to understanding what we mean by art. It's a question still being asked in contemporary literature. Yet, it's only through coming to great understanding of what art is that we can then attempt to determine what the future of art will have in store. Should we consider art only that which we find aesthetically pleasurable? In that case, will the future of art bring additional ways of art being made aesthetic? The question of the future of art is directly related to what art is. Therefore, it's necessary to first consider a way to understand art such that we may understand what the future of art might bring. This paper, the author will outline the major position on the meaning of art in order to draw out a commonality among the many theories. In doing so, I will argue that what we call art is simply a representation of the art forms of which they are a part. Before that, I wanna ask you, do you know art? Yeah, from journal article, art is creative phenomenon which changes constantly, not just insofar it's being created continually, but also in the very meaning of arts. Find a suitable definition of arts is not easy, and it has been the subject of much inquiry throughout artistic expression. Next, methodology. I approach this topic from a qualitative and historical perspective, analyze various accounts of arts and definition of arts, in an attempt to find similarities among the many approaches. Drawing out the commonalities, that is by find what each theory proposes in unison. The distinction between art forms and forms of art becomes grand. I believe this commonality is the perceiving of arts as a representation in some capacity or another. While at times it may appear that this paper is normative, suggesting how art ought to be considered, it's entirely meant to be descriptive in nature, offering only how art really is or has been defined, and using this historical and qualitative analysis to explore the future of art based on these descriptive claims. Next, this paper suggests the crucial distinction between art forms and forms of arts is necessary in order to better understand arts. The latter of this corresponds to that which we will typically call art, such as painting, singing, etc. The former corresponds to the form out of which this takes shape, movement, speech, etc. With this distinction set out, it becomes clear that art and the aesthetic is rooted in the properties of things such as the color, shape, and the texture, rather than the product of creation itself. Thus, the future of art will bring a new aesthetic in which these properties become recognized as art, and such there will be an aesthetic of everyday life. Next, result and discussion. Next, aesthetic definition in history. Since we find major flaws in each of the major methods of defining arts, how then are we left to do so? We must consider the underlying problem with these approaches. Before we may appropriately understand arts, some of the first theories regard a focus on the ability arts has to represent the world around us. Most of the ancient philosophers consider the function of arts to be mimesis, that art is merely an imitation of appearances. Next, art from Plato's theory. Plato divides knowledge of things into three classes or categories: forms, object, and categories. The paintings we make, the poems we write, and the stories we tell are all limited to actual things, and to what extent they are limited. Art is not as meaningful or as important as objects and forms that are real and tangible. All such things both the minds of those who have and do not abstract the knowledge of how they really are. Next, art from Aristotle's theory. Aristotle also thought that art was aimed at imitation or mimesis. His approach is far more negative than Plato's own account. For Aristotle, object imitation doesn't give us false knowledge, but is more useful. In fact, we learn through imitation, which ultimately leads to habituation, an important aspect of developing virtue. Thus, imitation of nature or objects can teach us and should be praised, not even eliminate it. Kant's theory. Kant discussed art in terms of the aesthetic judgment we make. In particular, Kant suggests that pure aesthetic judgments are disinterested, or that they don't arise from a desire from the object that is the subject of our judgment. This pure or free beauty is less common and applies only to art that is abstract, or which doesn't aim to depict reality, such as instrumental music. More common is the judgment on inherent beauty, as Kant put it. When considering works of art, one can realize that a work of art is a kind of proposition present in the context of art as a commentary on art. This suggests the conclusion that art should in some way try to prove the definition of what it means to be art. Defining arts. If we want to understand what art itself, we need to define a category that can place two different forms of arts, both fine arts and craft. This doesn't mean that the two should be separate from the same art form, but only that the art form should be categorized in such a way that these two distinct art forms can be understood as categories of art in general. Next, art presentation. As John Cage advised, walking or talking in general are both representation of art forms, namely the arts of movement and the arts of speech and language. One theorist who proposed a similar approach to understanding art, C. Bell, writes that to appreciate a work of art, we need nothing but a sense of forms and knowledge of three-dimensional space. Thus, the aesthetic element in a work is only color, shape, size, etc. However, these art forms, as we call them, are still not aesthetically pleasing art. So that there are factors that make people appreciate these things more. There needs to be a more aesthetic way to represent these art forms through an art form. In other words, so that these art forms can be fully appreciated. Various forms of art or fine arts are used to represent the art forms more aesthetically. Therefore, the art of movement is now represented by art forms such as dance, while the art of speech is represented through singing. These art forms are only more aesthetic in today's era.
The future of art and concluding remarks. Taking an idea about the future of art and by looking at what is meant by arts, it's concluded that arts is much broader than just fine arts or crafts. Then, by examining these differences, it's concluded that future art will place more emphasis on the art form itself, rather than on art forms that require representation through art forms in order to be enjoyed aesthetically. Meaning we suggest aesthetic change. This shift in aesthetic value will eventually lead to an understanding of life as something aesthetic by itself, without the need for aesthetic fillers. The last summary presentation material. Therefore, this art has no definite meaning because there are so many meanings of arts. The most important thing this art is the aesthetic or beauty created by the artist, and there must also be a drive factor that makes the arts more beautiful and has aesthetic feeling, namely the way art presentation and art appreciation. Art presentation here is very important because its work can show art more. For example, the art of motion can be presented through dance, sound art can be done by singing, and expression art can also be through painting whose meaning can be presented right. And these aesthetic things must also be applied in life in the future. I think that's all about my presentation today. Thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.